Hello, this is Stone Crier. I wanted to discuss the subject of the Targums and the Word of the Lord. I've been doing some research on this topic for a little bit, and I wanted to share my findings. The reason it might be of interest to you is that the New Testament writers do some interesting things when they apply Tanakh or Old Testament verses to Yeshua, Jesus. No matter what your understanding is, it's clear that the New Testament writers take Old Testament verses that are about Yahweh and apply them to Yeshua. Before we address the subject itself, let's just take a look at a few of these instances to get an idea of what they are doing that gave rise to this study. So we have John 1, verses 1 through 3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So the prologue of John is exceptionally well known. There is this Logos Christology that he draws from. Logos is the Greek word for word, and that gets applied to Yeshua. In certain circles there is some controversy over this, but we won't dig into that quite yet. Suffice it to say, whatever you believe John means by word, it's clear that he attributes the act of creation to him, it, as a means by which creation was accomplished. Let's look at another place. Colossians 1, 15 through 16. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. So here Paul is skipping the word part and jumping straight into attributing the act of creation to Yeshua. This seems like a big jump compared to what we read in the Old Testament. And let's turn to that now. So Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So I'm not reading Yeshua or the word here. It just seems like it's saying God. I mean, that's what the surface level of the text says. But let's look at Isaiah 44:24. Thus says Yahweh, your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am Yahweh, who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth by myself. So this supports the Genesis 1 reading, in opposition to the New Testament, at least on the surface. So what are John and Paul actually doing here? Well, let's see another example of this type of thing. So we have Revelation 1, 17 and 18. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead, but he laid his right hand on me, saying, Fear not, I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. There are some who question who is speaking, but 1:17 is clear that the one speaking is Yeshua because he died. No one will make that claim of the Father. And in Revelation 22, Behold, I am coming soon, bringing my recompense with me, to repay each one for what he has done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Then skipping down to 16, I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you about these things for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star. So we have the first and the last being recorded by John as attributed to Yeshua. So what does the Old Testament have to say? In Isaiah, we see, Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel and his Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts, I am the first and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. It's interesting that Isaiah has Yahweh describing himself with this description. And a little further in Isaiah, Listen to me, O Jacob and Israel, whom I called. I am he. I am the first and I am the last. My hand laid the foundation of the earth, and my right hand spread out the heavens. When I call to them, they stand forth together. So here again, we see some verses that are being quoted in the New Testament to describe Yeshua, where in the Old Testament context, they are referring to Yahweh. Let's look at one more. We see in Philippians, So that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So Philippians is quoting Isaiah, so let's turn to that. Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth. For I am God and there is no other. By myself I have sworn. From my mouth has gone out in righteousness a word that shall not return. To me every knee shall bow, every tongue shall swear allegiance. So God is saying this about himself. And yet again, we have a New Testament writer who is applying it to Yeshua. So, what's going on? It looks like the New Testament writers have gotten very inventive all of a sudden. On the surface, there seems to be a sharp break from the Old Testament on how these verses are being used. Did they lose the script? I think there is something more going on. So we have verses here that give us a picture of a God who tells us his plan ahead of time. While it may be concealed until it happens, once it is revealed, it will not conflict with what was previously proclaimed. His plans work out, and he has no need for plan Bs. So we need to dive into the context of the first century and what their understanding of the Old Testament was. We need to know what is in their heads when they are writing like this. This brings us to the Targums. What are they? The Targumim were spoken paraphrases, explanations, and expansions of the Jewish scriptures that a rabbi would give in the common language of the listeners, which was often Aramaic. That had become necessary near the end of the 1st century BCE as the common language was in transition, and Hebrew was used for little more than schooling and worship. Writing down the Targum was prohibited. Nevertheless, some Targumatic writings appeared as early as the middle of the 1st century CE. Yes, I'm citing Wikipedia. Please don't freak out. It's a very general description, very accessible to all. Most of the common people did not understand Hebrew, so when they went to synagogue to hear the Torah, the prophets, and the writings read aloud, they needed someone to translate into Aramaic. This was the job of the Targumist. They would translate into Aramaic on the fly, insert commentary and explanations into the reading, and they would alter the text as needed to better explain what they believed the text really said. Eventually, a number of them were put into a text format, and a few have survived down to us today. But why is that important? Well, the Targums give us a glimpse into what was being taught in the 1st century. This allows us to see a portion of the context in which Yeshua came and the New Testament writers composed their works. One of the doctrines that we get a glimpse of that plays a key role in the New Testament writings is that of the two powers in heaven, or the two Yahwehs doctrine. Dr. Heiser puts it as, the ancient Israelite knew two Yahwehs, one invisible, a spirit, the other visible, often in human form. The two Yahwehs at times appear together in the text, at times being distinguished, at other times not. Early Judaism understood this portrayal and its rationale. There was no sense of a violation of monotheism, since either figure was indeed Yahweh. There was no second distinct God running the affairs of the cosmos. During the Second Temple period, Jewish theologians and writers speculated on an identity for the second Yahweh. Guesses ranged from divinized humans, from the stories of the Hebrew Bible, to exalted angels. These speculations were not considered unorthodox. That acceptance changed when certain Jews, the early Christians, connected Jesus with this orthodox Jewish idea. This explains why these Jews, the first converts to following Jesus the Christ, could simultaneously worship the God of Israel and Jesus, and yet refuse to acknowledge any other God. Jesus was the incarnate second Yahweh. In response, as Siegel's work demonstrated, Judaism pronounced the two powers teaching a heresy sometime in the 2nd century AD. We need to grasp that modern rabbinical Judaism is not the same thing as Second Temple Judaism. I admit that Second Temple Judaism was not a homogeneous unit. There were sects and variations within the major sects. However, it is necessary to know that there are major doctrines that existed and were widely taught that no practicing Jewish person today would accept. Part of this, and this is my opinion, is that Rabbinic Judaism went through a period of reaction against Christianity, where doctrines that were highly compatible with acceptance of Yeshua as the Messiah were eventually jettisoned. I believe the two powers in heaven is just such a doctrine. This was not a fringe view. This was a mainstream school of thought. A good proof of this is that one of the most famous Jewish writers of this era was heavily influenced by this doctrine of two Yahwehs. Philo of Alexandria is probably the second most well-known Jewish writer of the 1st century, just behind Josephus. I'm going to read a passage from one of his works, but first, let's look into the verse that he is considering and then see his response to it. From Genesis 9:6, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image." Why is it that he speaks as if of some other God, saying that he made man after the image of God, and not that he made him after his own image? Very appropriately, and without any falsehood, was this oracular sentence uttered by God, for no mortal thing could have been formed on the similitude of the Supreme Father of the universe, but only after the pattern of the second deity, who is the Word, Logos, of the Supreme Being, since it is fitting that the rational soul of man should bear it, the type of the divine Word, since in his first word, God is superior to the most rational possible nature. But he who is superior to the Word holds his rank in a better and most singular preeminence. And how could the creature possibly exhibit a likeness of him in himself? Nevertheless, he also wished to intimate this fact, that God does rightly and correctly require vengeance, in order to the defense of the virtuous and consistent men, because such bear in themselves a familiar acquaintance with his word, of which the human mind is the similitude and form. Philo is very astutely picking up attention in this verse. Yahweh is speaking and is referring to God in the third person. Philo's answer is that it is a second deity, the Word, Logos, and Philo is writing before any of the Gospels were written down. So we have a mainstream doctrine of two Yahwehs preserved in the Targums. The sages aren't making this up. They know their Bible incredibly well, and through careful study and meditation, they are pulling something out of the text that is hidden. Let's look at some of the tension points that are causing the sages to have a deeper look. In Jeremiah we read, "Now the word of Yahweh came to me, saying..." Now, I know many people read that and think it's just a turn of phrase, but let's continue on. In verse 9 we have, "Then Yahweh put out his hand and touched my mouth, and Yahweh said to me..." Now this is interesting. It doesn't seem to be just a word coming to Jeremiah's mind. This sounds more like a character that came to him, spoke to him, and then reached out his hand and touched his mouth. What's more, it says that this is Yahweh. Let's move on. "And Yahweh appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth." We can try to deal with this text in a number of ways, but it very plainly says that Yahweh appeared to Abraham and he saw him. Then Yahweh ate the food Abraham had prepared for him. And that doesn't seem right because we know this part. "But," he said, "you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." We know there is a tension here because man cannot see God and live. Obviously, Abraham lived on after this, so something else is going on. In Genesis 19:24 we read, "Then Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from Yahweh out of heaven." Okay, now this is getting heavier, but this could still just be awkward phrasing. But then in Amos we read, "I overthrew some of you, as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, and you were as a brand plucked out of the burning, yet you did not return to me, declares Yahweh." Amos affirms the wording of Genesis 19:24 is intended. We have Yahweh speaking of one of his actions in the past in the first person, and in the very same sentence referring to an act of God in the third person. This is significant. Something deep is going on. The sages picked up on this, and this is why, if you were growing up in the late Second Temple period in Galilee and you went to the synagogue on Sabbath during the week of the Torah portion Vayera, which included Genesis 19, you may have heard this verse read as follows. "Then the word of Yahweh brought down on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from before Yahweh from the heavens." And here you have our first example of the two Yahwehs from the Targums. While the text says Yahweh, the Targumist alters it to read the word of Yahweh to distinguish the lesser Yahweh from the superior. Now, this was not only done in the passages where a tension exists. They took this and ran with it. Many times the lesser Yahweh is the figure to directly interact with humans and was the principal messenger and agent of the superior Yahweh. This lesser Yahweh was called the Memra, which is Aramaic for word. Now let's see some more examples. So back to our Genesis 1 example. "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." And from one of the Targums we read, "From the beginning, with wisdom, the Lord created and finished the heavens and the earth. Then the word of the Lord said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light, according to the decree of his word." So we not only have the Proverbs 8 passage tied in directly, but we see the Targumist explicitly stating that it was the Word who was the principal actor in creation. A little further we see, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." And in a Targum, "Then the Word of the Lord created mankind in his image. In an image from before the Lord he created him, male and his partner he created them. This is reminiscent of the same take as Philo. Man was created by the Word in his image. Genesis 3. And they heard the sound of Yahweh God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yahweh God among the trees of the garden. Now this is a verse that I think gives people trouble, but I have a hunch that the Targumist is going to fix that right now. From the Targum Onkelos, when they heard the sound of the word of Yahweh God walking in the garden, as the day was ending, then Adam and his wife hid from before Yahweh God in the midst of the trees of the garden. We don't have to try and imagine the infinite Father walking in the garden. The Targumist understands this to actually be the Word doing the walking. In Genesis 9, God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." This one doesn't strike too many as difficult on its own, but let's see what the Targumist does with it. Then the Lord said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between my word and all flesh that is on the earth." We see that God, the superior Yahweh, is making the covenant, but he makes it between his word and all flesh. So this Targumist believes that it is his word that is the actual party to the covenant. Genesis 17:7 and 10. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And then down to 10. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. We have another covenant here, and this is the Abrahamic covenant. And the Targumist records, and I will establish my covenant between my word and you and your descendants after you, throughout their generations, for an eternal covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. This is my covenant that you shall keep between my word and you, and your descendants after you, to circumcise every male of yours. Again, this Targumist believes the actual party to the covenant is the word of Yahweh. So Abraham called the name of that place, Yahweh will provide, as it is said to this day, on the mount of Yahweh it shall be provided. This Targum varies quite a bit from the text. Then Abraham worshipped and prayed in the name of the word of Yahweh, and said, so that this generation who will arise after him will say, in the mountain of the sanctuary of the Lord, where Abraham offered Isaac his son, and in this mountain the glory of the Shekinah of Yahweh was revealed to him. Wow. So the Targumist believes that Abraham prayed in the name of the word of Yahweh. That sounds exactly like what believers of Yeshua do today. They pray in his name. This is a Jew writing this, not a Christian. And this tradition predates Yeshua. I think that's very significant. Now, the glory of the Shekinah of Yahweh is an interesting phrase. Shekinah refers to the manifestation of God and his glory. I don't want to get too far ahead, but I just want to quickly point this out. Speaking of Yeshua, he is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. I think we're getting a really good glimpse at what the New Testament writers are doing and where they are drawing this from. Let's continue. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then Yahweh shall be my God. And from the Targum Onkelos, then Jacob swore an oath, saying, if the word of Yahweh will be my help, and guard me in this way that I am going, and give me food to eat and clothing to wear, and I return in peace to the house of my father, then the word of Yahweh will become my God. So the Targumist believes that Jacob swore if the word of Yahweh did these things, then the word would be his God. This is a monotheistic Jew writing this. They have no problem with this. It's very interesting. Moving on. Israel saw the great power that Yahweh used against the Egyptians, so the people feared Yahweh, and they believed in Yahweh and in his servant Moses. And the Targum Onkelos, and Israel saw the power of the great hand which the Lord made to appear in Egypt, and the people feared before Yahweh, and believed in the word of Yahweh, and in the prophetic work of Moshe his servant. The great hand has a very strong messianic flavor to it. The Messiah in other places in Scripture is associated with the right hand, hand, or arm of God, and the Targumist is bringing that thought right into the text here. Additionally, you see that the people believe in the Word. That's a very New Testament type of thing to say, and here it is being understood from the Old Testament. We've got more. Yahweh your God, who goes before you, will himself fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. And the Targumist writes, the word of Yahweh your God, who is leading before you, he will fight the war for you, just as everything that he had done for you in Egypt in your sight. And so the Targumist believes it is the Word who is leading them in the wilderness and doing the fighting for them in their battles. And as soon as you heard the voice out of the midst of the darkness, while the mountain was burning with fire, you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders, and you said, behold, Yahweh our God has shown us his glory and greatness, and we have heard his voice out of the midst of the fire. This day we have seen God speak with man, and man still live. Now therefore, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of Yahweh our God any more, we shall die. For who is there of all flesh that has heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the midst of a fire, as we have, and still live? And from the Targum, and it came about when you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness, while the mountain was burning with fire, that you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders, and you said, behold, Yahweh our God has shown us his glory and his greatness, and the voice of his word was heard from out of the midst of the fire. Today we saw that the Lord was speaking with man, and yet he would live. But now why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we again hear the voice of the word of Yahweh our God, we shall die. For who is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living word of the Lord, who was speaking from the midst of the fire, such as we have, and continue to live? Here we have the recounting of the Sinai event where the people heard the voice of God. The Targumist is saying it was actually the Word who spoke here, and that the one who gave the commandments was indeed the Word. This paints the crucifixion in an entirely different light. I know people have many theories about why it was acceptable for Yeshua to die for us, but this insight makes perfect sense. If Yeshua was the one with whom the Mosaic covenant was made, if he was the one Israel was married to here, then what Paul talks about in Romans 7 becomes crystal clear. The husband dies so that the unfaithful wife is free from her adultery. And when Yeshua is raised, the woman is free to remarry him. This is because it was the death of the former spouse that freed her. And what happens later? There's the marriage feast of the Lamb. So we're going to try this again, but this time we're going to get it right. And still more. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. And from the Targum, no man shall station himself before you all the days of your life. Just as my word was at the aid of Moses, so my word will be at your aid. I will not abandon you and will not reject you. So it was the Word who was with Moses and with Joshua supporting them. Sounds very much like Yeshua saying he would be with us until the end of the age, that he would be where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, that he would dwell within us. This is on the very same wavelength. Then David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Let us fall into the hand of Yahweh, for his mercy is great, but let me not fall into the hand of man. And the Targumist writes, Then David said to Gad, It is pressing on me very much. Let us be handed over now into the hand of the word of Yahweh, for his mercies are great, but let me not be handed over into the hand of man. David would prefer to fall into the hand of the word. We know that all judgment is given to the Son, and his mercies are great. That's very interesting. But Israel is saved by Yahweh with everlasting salvation. You shall not be put to shame or confounded to all eternity. And from the Targum, Israel has been redeemed by the word of Yahweh with an eternal deliverance. You will not be ashamed, and you will not be humbled forever and ever. The word is a redeemer who has an eternal deliverance. That's very, very messianic. So it should now be no mystery how John could write something like this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born, not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me.'" No one has ever seen God. The only God, who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. When he says the Word was with God and was God, that's a good way of putting the two Yahwehs idea. John is not writing anything new here. He is following in the tradition of the two Yahwehs. The innovation that he does make is to say that this Word is Yeshua. He's not taking a giant leap into brand new territory. He is taking the next logical step. The New Testament writers aren't arguing that Yeshua did these things. They are arguing that Yeshua is the identity of the Word of Yahweh, who the people already knew did these things. Many of the people already had a conceptual understanding of the Word. They just didn't know who he was. Was it Adam, Enoch, Michael, Uriel, Gabriel? The New Testament writers are coming along and saying, it's Yeshua. To reiterate, no one has ever seen God. All those places where it says that people saw, touched, ate with Yahweh, well, that was Yahweh. But it wasn't the Father. It was the Son. It was the unique God who was at the Father's side, who has revealed the Father to us. John is endorsing the Targums and the doctrine of the two Yahwehs here and in the rest of his writings. Let's look at an Old Testament verse that summarizes the Messiah succinctly, but refers to him as Yahweh. Isaiah 33:22. For Yahweh is our judge, Yahweh is our lawgiver, Yahweh is our king, he will save us. Back to John we read, for the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. So the Father judges no one, and yet Yahweh is our judge. In John again, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. So Yeshua gave us commandments, and the Targumist believes those were the ones given at Sinai. And yet Isaiah says Yahweh is our lawgiver. And still more John. On his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Yeshua is called King of Kings, and Yahweh is our King. And in Acts, and there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. So salvation is found nowhere else but Yeshua, and Isaiah says Yahweh will save us. I don't think these are coincidences. Knowing what we know of how the tradition was to try to identify whether the Yahweh of the text was the Word or the superior Yahweh, then I think it's likely that the New Testament writers here are inserting the Word into Isaiah 33:22. It's Yahweh, but it's the Word, not the Father. Why would the Son be acting in place of the Father? So that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father, in the same way. Now, if you think it's a crazy notion that both the Father and the Son were operating under the name Yahweh in the Old Testament, let's look at a few more verses before you turn this off. In Acts we read, This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone. And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Now, we just read that on the last slide, but I wanted to read it again for emphasis. There is no other name but Yeshua's for salvation. And then there's Joel. And it shall come to pass that everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh shall be saved. So is this a contradiction? Yet again, back to John. Holy Father, keep them in your name, which you have given me, that they may be one, even as we are one. No contradiction. The Father gave the name to the Son. The Son has the Father's name. Now, while we're on the topic of being one, the Shema. Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. The Shema is the fundamental tenet of Judaism. It's prayed 2 to 4 times every day by Orthodox Jews. It's used by Unitarians to argue against any kind of divine plurality. It's also ambiguous for translators since Shema, or hear, is the only verb. Now, I'm not claiming that what I'm about to say is absolute truth. It's speculative, I grant that. But given what we've learned about how the Targumists and the New Testament writers understood the two Yahwehs concept, there's a two-ness that sticks out now in the Shema. Does Yahweh need to be in the text twice to communicate that our God, Yahweh, is one? Hold that thought. Now let's look at something that Yeshua says, in the Gospel of John no less. John, chapter 10, verses 27 and 30. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I and the Father are one. Now let's insert a little commentary. Do a word study on sheep in the Old Testament, and you'll find that Israel, either all 12 tribes or just the northern 10-tribe kingdom, are referred to as sheep. Hear, O Israel, I, Yahweh, and the Father, Yahweh, are one, Echad. I think Yeshua is indeed inserting himself into the Shema, not as a new thing, but as a revealing of who the Yahweh of the Old Testament is. It is the Father and the Son. We didn't know that until the Son came to reveal the Father. This relationship is the revelation of what was hidden in plain sight in the Old Testament. I have another example like this. Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. This is the famous I am who I am, or I am that I am. This phrase only occurs once in all of Scripture. The Hebrew is Aye Esher Aye. Aye is the same verb that gives us Yahweh, to be. And like the Shema, we have it twice. I think it's possible that this is trying to communicate something deeper. Also notice that after the full name, God then says to say that I am sent Moses. It sounds a bit like maybe there are two, and then the one that is speaking and actually commanding Moses is just one of the I ams. Is there something elsewhere in Scripture that might shed some light on this? Well, there is, and of course, it's John. Jesus said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. In the Greek, that's the present tense, I am, exactly as it is translated. I think Yeshua is identifying himself as one of the I ams from the full name given in Exodus 3. His word choice is deliberate and profound in its implications. After looking at the Targums and getting a better sense of the context of the two Yahweh's doctrine present in the first century, I don't think we can continue to believe that the New Testament writers represent a major break with the Old Testament thinking on this matter. The New Testament writers likely knew of the Word of Yahweh from their youth. Their understanding of the Old Testament was completely in line with the revelation of Yeshua as the Word of God. Thanks to the surviving Targums, we can get a glimpse of that understanding to bridge the perceived gap between Old Testament and New Testament, and instead see the continuity.